Hello, hello, hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome back. In this video, we're going to keep reading. We're going to do chapters 16, 17, and 18 in The Sacred Art of Forgiveness by Marcia Ford. So let's go ahead and jump right in. 16 is titled Transformational Forgiveness, and I apologize for my light. I don't know, sometimes it has a mind of its own and I just can't get it quite to not beam right on me, so I apologize for that. All right, we'll go ahead and just get started. At least 2 research groups have unearthed a good news, bad news scenario in recent years in separate studies on Americans' attitudes toward forgiveness. Both studies covered a lot of territory, but the findings related to one area of analysis, God's forgiveness, presented a bewildering dichotomy that caught my attention. The good news is that a considerable majority of Americans, nearly 75%, feel as if God has forgiven them, according to the University of Michigan Institute for Social Research. The bad news is that it hasn't made a whole lot of difference in the way many Americans live their lives. That's according to the Barna Research Group, which found that boomers in particular snapped up the offer of forgiveness presented in the Ask Jesus into Your Heart mentality and went on with their lives as if nothing of real consequence had occurred. Very few American Christians have experienced a sense of spiritual brokenness that compelled them to beg God for His forgiveness and for mercy and acceptance through the love of Christ. Barna pointed out, "We have a nation of Christians who took the best offer, but relatively few who were so humiliated and hopeless before a holy and omnipotent God that they cried out for undeserved compassion. Humiliated, hopeless, spiritually broken. That was me, a bona fide boomer on a warm spring night in 1972, when I begged God for forgiveness. Less than half an hour earlier, I had dismissed God and all that went with God as nothing more than wishful thinking. Sitting smack in the middle of a room full of crazy evangelical Christians, I had dismissed them as well. What on earth did these scrubbed and gleaming Barbies and Kens know about sin, or life for that matter? And why on earth had I agreed to come to this meeting anyway? So maybe it was a Friday night and I was bored and didn't have a date and it was too early for the bars to be worth hitting, and if I went this one time, then I could say that I went to one of their meetings and it did nothing for me, and my former drinking buddies turned Jesus freaks would have to quit bugging me about giving my life to God and all. Except it didn't work out that way, because the speaker that night, a Harley-riding Bible professor I had dismissed as a fraud, spoke 9 words in sequence that I could not dismiss. God not only forgave your sins, He forgot them. Those words hit me with a force that to this day I can't adequately explain. My mind alternately blurred and reeled and snapped to attention and retreated from conscious thought. The only words I recall thinking were these: What? What did he just say? God could forget my sins? I couldn't do that. How could the judge of the universe do that? Did that mean I was a harsher judge of my sins than even God was? A half hour later, I was a sobbing mass of repentance, unable to utter a word to God. Within minutes, I experienced the floodwaters of love and forgiveness washing over me. Me, in the midst of all those Barbies, forgiven, reconciled to God, and as time would tell, transformed. I did not hit the bars that night. Some of my friends and relatives decided my newfound faith was just a phase. I'd go back to my old way of life, and this whole God thing would become a distant memory. Some of them, I'm sure, are still waiting for that to happen after 35 years. It won't, though, because I'm one of those very few Americans who experienced a very real sense of spiritual brokenness, and, I suppose, one of the very few boomers who realized that something of real consequence had occurred in my life that night. You know, it's easy to argue against theological ideas and spiritual concepts and biblical principles. It's easy because we have to use words to state our case. And words, even our own words, can become weapons in the hands of those who dispute our claims. But it's difficult to argue against a genuinely transformed life. When my life changed so dramatically that even to others I seemed to become a new person entirely, it's not because I embraced a set of lofty ideas or concepts or principles. It's because I had a life-changing, transforming encounter with God that was only made possible by His gracious offer of forgiveness and reconciliation. God's forgiveness, the real thing, not some bogus feel-good idea in your head, is transformational. It changes us. It changes us into the kind of person who can, by the power that God has given us, make our own gracious offer of forgiveness and reconciliation to others in return. Reflection. Have you had a life-changing encounter with God that was rooted in forgiveness? Have you ever experienced true spiritual brokenness, humiliation, hopelessness? It's when you come to the end of yourself that you can most clearly see God beckoning you to accept the kind of forgiveness that will truly transform your life. And here's the practice. Ask someone close to you what evidence of transformation they've witnessed in your life. You may be surprised at the response you get. It's possible that you've been transformed in ways you never thought of. Then again, you may not be very happy with the response you get, but that's all part of the process. For instance, your significant other may tell you that you're nowhere near as manipulative as you used to be, and you realize you've walked right into another offense you'll have to forgive. If you approach this practice with an open mind, you'll probably end up feeling a whole lot better about yourself in the long run. Other people can see the most amazing things in us, qualities and character traits that we never would have imagined. And it's best that we don't argue with them when they do. Believe that they're the most wise and astute and insightful people in the world. All right. And now, as I said in a previous video, we have some quotes in each chapter that have to do with what the author it was just talking about. So I'll read those. A spiritual conversion, which was not also a conversion of life, was no conversion at all, but a delusion. The soul cannot be God's and the life not God's at the same time. The soul cannot be recreated and the life remain unchanged. Where there is no outward change, it is safe to deny an inward change. Roland Allen. I can forgive, but I cannot forget is only another way of saying I will not forgive. Forgiveness ought to be like a canceled note, torn in two and burned up, so that it never can be shown against one. Henry Ward Beecher. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may prove what the will of God is, that which is good and acceptable and perfect. Romans 12, verse 2. But we all, with unveiled face, beholding as in a mirror the glory of the Lord, are being transformed into the same image from glory to glory, just as from the Lord the Spirit. 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 18. I always get those confused. I'm sorry. I have read the Bible. It's just been a while. Chapter 17, True Freedom. To forgive is to set a prisoner free and discover that the prisoner was you. Lewis B. Smedes. That's such a powerful quote that I think it deserves to be set apart on a line all its own. It expresses the truth of genuine freedom so succinctly that I have a good mind to go right out and turn it into a bumper sticker slogan. Wouldn't that be great? Bumper stickers that gently encourage forgiveness? Instead of promoting our favorite slimy candidate, we could use our cars to actually make the world a better place. My newfound bumper sticker slogan embodies a principle that we all need to remember. We keep ourselves chained to those things and those people that have caused us pain when we allow them to dominate our thoughts. And trust me, when we withhold forgiveness, our thoughts can become consumed both by the offense and the offender. I've known countless women who have said they're glad to be free of some lousy husband or lover, and then continue to criticize and condemn and complain about the lousy guy for months on end. I feel like shouting, "You've got to be kidding me. You're no more free of him then than you were when the scoundrel was living with you." Next time, I just may. Unforgiveness is the ultimate closed human condition. I visualize unforgiveness as a clenched heart, just like a clenched fist that is holding something so tightly that it's causing pain for the person attached to the fist. Think about that image. If you've ever had a cardiac event, as I have, you know it's nothing you ever want to experience again. Your actual physical heart seizes up. It feels clenched. For several minutes, everything, like time and life itself, is suspended. Once your heart kicks back in and returns to normal, you do whatever it takes to prevent such a thing from ever happening again. If you're smart, that is. Imagine your other heart, your spirit, seizing up in a similar way. That's what happens when you withhold forgiveness. It turns in on itself, holding on to the offense with an ever tighter grasp. A portion of your life is in a state of suspension. You've lost your heartbeat, the pulse of life that keeps you functioning normally. That's no way to live. That's a way to die. Let's go back to the prison metaphor. The thing about prison, in a metaphorical sense, is that you can be imprisoned and not even know it. Two images come immediately to mind, one rooted in fact, one in fiction: communism and the Matrix. Many people who were born into a communist society had no concept of the freedom they were missing out on until they matured and began to learn about the freedom that people in other countries took for granted. The people living in the fictional Matrix were equally clueless. It was only when they escaped that they could see the prison they were living in. Unforgiveness imprisons you in ways you cannot see until you escape its iron bars. You can read 100 books about the freedom that forgiveness brings, but until you forgive your offender or accept God's offer of forgiveness, you cannot fathom the astonishing impact it will have on your life. You look back at what life was like before you experienced the freedom of forgiveness, and you cannot believe you ever lived a life of such miserable confinement. One thing to bear in mind about prison, though: there will always be those prisoners who cannot cut it on the outside. Career criminals often set themselves up to get caught just so they can go back to prison again, where their lives are controlled and their basic needs are met by someone else. Freedom can be frightening because it requires a person to become responsible, mature, and accountable for their own actions. Contrary to unforgiveness, forgiveness is the ultimate open human condition. It opens our hearts to God and others. It restores the pulse of our lives, and our heart begins to beat for others once again. It releases us from a dark prison of our own making and leads us out into the light. When we finally forgive, we finally know true freedom. Here's the reflection. Come with a metaphor of your own that illustrates the restraints of unforgiveness and the freedom of forgiveness. Think in terms of closed and open. Perhaps a closed-off room whose door is finally opened, letting in light and fresh air for the first time in years. Think about what that image reveals about you, your past or present experiences with forgiveness, and what changes you need to make in your life in order to experience genuine freedom. And here's the practice. In the book, When You Can't Say I Forgive You, which she wrote with David Hazard, Grace Ketterman tells of a time in a psychiatry class when the discussion turned to healing the scars of trauma. One student had been wiping the tears from his eyes with a handkerchief. The professor told him to hold the handkerchief tightly in his hand, and after a long pause, told him to let it fall. As the man bent down to pick it up, another student observed that in doing so, he was picking up his burdens all over again. The incident served as a fitting illustration of the concept of relinquishment, letting go of our burdens for good and finding freedom in the process. Relinquishment applies to offenses as well. Write out your grievances against someone who has offended you and resolve to forgive the person. Then ceremoniously throw the paper away or burn it. And our quotes. When you refuse to forgive someone, you still want something from that person. And even if it is revenge that you want, it keeps you tied to them forever. Henry Cloud and John Townsend. You cannot shake hands with a clenched fist. Indira Gandhi. When you hold resentment toward another, you are bound to that person or condition by an emotional link that is stronger than steel. Forgiveness is the only way to dissolve that link and get free. Catherine Ponder. As long as you don't forgive, who and whatever it is will occupy a rent-free space in your mind. Isabel Holland. 2 works of mercy set a man free. Forgive and you will be forgiven, and give and you will receive. St. Augustine. Chapter 18. Just like me. Shocking as it may seem, I once sat in judgment of a perfectly formed, perfectly coiffed, perfectly toothed, perfectly tanned little blonde. I didn't know her or anything at all about her, but she was a Jesus freak. I wasn't, and that's all I needed to know. I only saw her one time, the night in 1972 when God finally broke through my hostility and showered me with his love. Earlier in the evening, I had singled out this one girl as the target of my disdain for everything Christian. I even hated her for her name, which I won't disclose, but which was perfect. Her last name actually included the word love. How predictable was that? Later that night, after I crumbled in the presence of God's love, I overheard the perfect Ms. Love talking quietly to a group huddled around her to pray for her. As recently as the previous month, she had been a street prostitute. A trusted uncle had abused her throughout her childhood and early adolescence, and she had turned to prostitution in retaliation. And then 4 weeks earlier, she turned to God. The group prayed that she would have the strength to avoid returning to her previous lifestyle. I immediately left the judgment seat. I once heard a preacher suggest that we try an experiment. Everyone in the service would bring their burdens up front and place them on the altar. Then we'd look over everyone else's burdens and choose which ones we'd like to exchange for ours. He pretty much guaranteed that we'd end up going home with our own burdens. None of us would want the burdens other people carry around on a daily basis. When we judge other people, when we assume they live perfect lives, when we fail to acknowledge that they just might be experiencing pain of their own, we set up a solid barrier to the free flow of forgiveness from us to those who have hurt us. We disregard the very real possibility that the hurt they have inflicted on us has nothing to do with us at all, and everything to do with what is going on in their own lives, or what was going on in their lives decades earlier. What is it that causes us to forget that other people are also living in pain? We're not the only ones who have negative tapes playing in our heads, reminding us, for example, that we're losers who will never amount to anything. We're not the only ones who have been abused or abandoned or humiliated or whatever. We look at the person who has offended us. We look at them and their life, their perfect life, and we cannot believe that there can be any reason, any justification for the way they treated us. Maybe there isn't, but maybe there is. No matter how well you know someone, you cannot know everything that is going on in their life or in their head. Let me be blunt here. Even if it's your husband of 60 years, even if it's your closest sibling, even if it's your own child, you don't know it all. We don't know it all about ourselves, for goodness sakes. That's very true. Admitting that we do not know it all moves us up one step closer to forgiveness and reconciliation, because it moves us one step closer to recognizing that other people are just like us. You don't know everything about me. My husband doesn't know everything about me, neither does my sister or my brothers or my daughters. If I offend any of them, they cannot possibly know the myriad and complex factors that provoked the insensitive remark I made. The truth is, I don't even know what all those factors are. I want them to cut me some slack. I need them to cut me some slack. I'm only human. And so are those who offend me. They're only human, and I need to cut them some slack. If we could read the secret history of our enemies, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow once wrote, we should find in each person's life sorrow and suffering enough to disarm all hostility. By choosing to believe that even the smug and arrogant guy who broke your heart experiences his own sorrow and suffering, you make him human, just like you. Reflection. What are the burdens you are carrying? Is your offender aware of the weight on your shoulders? Are you aware of the weight on theirs? Do you think your offender would treat you differently if they knew everything that was going on in your life? What does that tell you about how you need to change your attitude toward them? Practice. Imagine you are God. Some of you won't find that difficult at all. I'm going to stop right there and just say that I believe God is in all of us, a divine spark in all of us. So in a way, I do believe that I'm God, but I also believe that all of you are God. We have that spark in our hearts that can never be seen, but that keeps us linked to God and to one another. Anyways, better yet, imagine that you are a child's version of God, someone up in heaven who is looking down on you, or looking down at you, not looking down on you. Get in character now, because this exercise is about to get rocky. You are God, and you know everything a person is thinking and doing. You are God, and now you are looking down at the person who has offended you in your real, I'm not actually God life. What is the offender saying to God about the situation you're embroiled in? What's going on in your offender's life that only God sees? No fair imagining all manner of dastardly deeds that you know the person would never commit. Keep it real. Then ask God to give you a compassion for your offender that knows no bounds. Now that you realize that your offender is just like you, the I'm not actually God you, Now that you realize he is just like you, the I'm not actually God you. Sorry, I read that wrong. All right, so let's read our quotes from this chapter. When you refuse to forgive someone, oh, wait a minute. I already read that one. Sorry. Here we go. You tend to feel sorrow over the circumstances instead of rage. You tend to feel sorry for the person rather than angry with them. You understand the suffering that drove the offense to begin with. It may not have turned out to be a happily ever after, but most certainly there is now a fresh once upon a time waiting for you from this day forward. Clarissa Pinkola Estes. Be kind. Everyone you meet is fighting a hard battle. John Watson. You have to be true to yourself, but you have to be true to your best self, not to the self that secretly thinks you are better than other people. Stephen Gaskin. All right, so that concludes our 3 chapters for this video. And I just want to say, I saw something, I think it was on Instagram not too long ago, that really stuck with me. It had to do with giving grace to others and forgiveness and not being so harsh on one another in society. And it was something like a woman saying she was driving around and she had a sign on the back of her vehicle that basically said, please forgive me if I make a mistake. My mother just died. And she came up with these examples like, please forgive me, if I cut you off, or if I'm not at my best, I'm going through a divorce, I'm dealing with severe depression. There was a bunch of examples. How much easier would it be for so many people out there if we literally wore a sign on our back or on our vehicle or in the front of our house telling people what we were going through so they can forgive us our transgressions even before we commit them? I thought that was kind of eye-opening, because it really does bring to light that no matter how put together a person looks or seems, there's something that everyone is going through something. Everyone is dealing with something. I went today to a UPS store in my local city to return something, and I go there all the time, and the family that runs it and owns it is so sweet, and they're so helpful, and they're so efficient. Never had an issue. There was a lady ahead of me, and there was a pretty long line, and she was yelling at, I think it's the main owner, for a charge of $1.35 that he did not tell her of before he provided the service. It wasn't the fact that she was upset about the money, but it was the way that she was speaking to him. I hate seeing people speak to one another so harshly and so meanly. And I have to remember that I don't know what that person is going through, but the cherry on top for me was that she was wearing a shirt that said she does everything through God's grace, or through Jesus's grace. And I thought, is that doing something through Jesus's grace? Like, have you looked down at your shirt? I don't really know if that's the living example I would want to give when wearing that shirt, but I had to laugh at that and just make light of it. And then also just remember that usually when people are mean and nasty or curt or short with you, it has nothing to do with you and everything to do with him or her or they or them, sorry. And I really, really try to make an effort to keep that in mind as I go about my day at work, out and about, with my children, with my husband, because just like the author said, that's true. Sometimes your family members and your closest people can act and say weird things or do things that, just don't seem like them. And you think you know them because you're with them every day and you know all the situations that they go through and everything in their life, but you can never really know unless you are literally in their head. And then even still, because, even in your own head, you don't always know. And I thought that was just something kind of really important to keep in mind when going about our days, is that we don't know what's going on in our minds half the time. We certainly can't know what's going on with everybody else. And to do our best to keep it in mind with genuine grace, that we are all connected, that all of us have our stuff that we're going through, and that usually when people don't give us the treatment that we feel we deserve, or that they treat us in a way that you would never treat somebody, that not everybody thinks the way that you would think or that I would think, first of all. And everybody has a different perception of what they think is rude or kind and unkind. That lady in the store, that could have just been the way that she talks all the time. I don't know. She called somebody on the phone and said, I'm in front of the UPS store, come around. And I thought, oh my God, is somebody going to come in here and do something over $1.35? And then she got on the phone with the UPS human resources. And I just thought, this is a good time to practice grace. This is a good time to practice non-judgment, non-attachment. And even though I didn't really have anything to forgive her for, I felt like I wanted to forgive her on behalf of the guy that worked there and the 50 other people in there that were physically reacting, that were making noises and making faces and sighing and, making little comments under their breath like people do, like being at the DMV or the post office or something. Anyways, that's just my little story for to add on to this little lesson that we've learned today. So in the next chapter, we'll be reading 19, 20, and 21. So we'll be reading Growing Up, Lasting Peace, and Overlooking the Trivial. Ooh, that will be a good one. So until next time, I hope that gives you plenty to chew on, and stay cool if you live in an area that is hot. I know that I live in an area that's hot. We had a few days of cool weather, but now we're back up into the high 90s and into the triple digits here. I live in Northern California. So it goes from fall to summer to winter all within a week, and that's interesting. But anyways, until next time, please take care of yourself. Please take care of those around you. I will see you again very soon for our next chapters. And if you feel so inclined, please like, subscribe, and comment. Hit the notification bell so you know when I post my next segment. Until next time, I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.